Hello and welcome back to the Prepper's Pantry with your host, myself, stateless cook, Michael of Barbary. So today we're doing something that I had promised you earlier, like I've been doing this forever, but at any rate, in the previous video I had made mention of the idea of making some raspberry wine with some of the raspberries that we've harvested. So that is precisely what we're going to do here today. So I'm going to take you through my brewing process. It's probably not the only way you can do some of these things. I don't even necessarily know if it's going to be the correct way, because I'll be perfectly frank and say what we're going to be doing in this video is a bit of an experiment for me, and we're not even going to know if it's going to bear fruit, pun kind of intended, for weeks or months yet. So it's going to be a learning experience for all of us, but hey, I'm going to take you along with me in it anyhow, and we'll see where we're at. One thing I do want to emphasize, and I've learned this the hard way, when you're brewing, and it doesn't matter what you're brewing, okay? Cleanliness. Cleanliness, cleanliness, cleanliness. You need it, and you need it bad. I experimented some last year with making some wine out of maple syrup, and I'm here to tell you that it went poorly because I did not pay close enough attention to my sanitation practices. It got contaminated, and it smelled and kind of tasted like I would imagine dirty feet tastes like. It certainly smelled like it. It was awful. It was very bad. I ended up dumping it out. It was atrocious. It didn't even do something nice like turn into vinegar for me. It was just disgusting. So, something to be aware of. Make sure you are engaging in proper sanitation. I'll show you where I'm sanitizing some of my equipment right now, in fact, as we get into our process. So, here we are. Let's go see about making some wine. Okay, so, real quickly, this is sanitizing. Now, I know this looks disgusting because it's kind of yellowy and you can see that, but that's because it's got a very dilute iodine solution in it to sanitize. Not only do you need to keep your equipment clean, free of extra debris and crap like that, you need to make sure you're killing off any of the microbes that you don't want present. So that means washing thoroughly, sanitizing, and there's no such thing as sanitizing too much. I sanitized this after I was done with it last time. It's been sitting for a while, so I cleaned it out again, and now I'm sanitizing it again, just to be certain there's nothing hiding in any nooks and crannies here. Now this solution's been sitting in this bucket, and you can see a couple other little pieces of equipment. I'll go over what those are here in a minute. This has been sitting here soaking now for probably about a half an hour. Probably a little excessive, but I'd rather be a little extra cautious. So now, as to what we've got in here, because this is all I'm going to need initially. Now this is just like a big old 5-gallon, well, a little bit bigger than 5-gallon actually, plastic pail, bought specifically for brewing, for two reasons. First one is the lid that it comes with. As you can see, it's got a little hole there with a rubber washer in it. That is so I can fit an airlock to it, which I'll show you in just a second. And the other reason is you don't want to use old buckets like you can get from restaurants that had pickles in it, for example, because plastic will eventually start picking up fragrances and flavors. And unless you want to brew things that taste like pickles, don't use a pickle bucket. Okay, as to what's in here with it. This is just a sample taker. A little tip there at the end. It's a more sanitary way to take samples out of a bucket. Because as you can see, the liquid that was in there is draining. So you don't actually have to touch anything. You don't have to tip it over and push it down in there. Give it just a second, and it's filled back up. Okay? This is a hydrometer. It's used for measuring what's called specific gravity. It's basically the density of your water. You know, and as sugars and alcohols get in it, it changes the density around the level it floats to, helps determine all of that. And this one is made out of freaking polycarbonate instead of plastic. That, what I just did there, That'd normally break a glass hydrometer. I know I've broken several of them. Okay. Now, last but not least, because it was down at the bottom, this is part of the airlock, so there's another piece that fits inside there. You fill that with a little bit of water, you fit that into the rubber stopper. And then during the fermenting process, the yeast produces CO2, and the CO2 will then rise through the liquid in the airlock and bubble out without getting more oxygen in, which is also very important because with the oxygen comes other microorganisms that we want to keep out. So, that is the sanitizing process. Now let's get on to the actual brewing process. Okay, so here we go. Actual brewing. So one of the things I'm going to be doing, though, this is local honey. Where I live produces a whole crapload of it. I'm using this so we have a little bit more fermentable sugar in our mix because there's not quite as much raspberry as I would like to make sure we've got plenty of sugars. So, and as you can see, it's kind of cloudy. It's also very firm, which probably means there's a fair bit of wax still in this, which means this step is going to be even more important in this case. Now, normally with just like fruits or something like that, you basically just press them, juice them, throw them in, and away you go type of thing. Okay, we're using honey for some extra sugar. So to help remove the impurities from it, we're going to actually boil it in some of the water that we're using for our brewing process. Got about 2 gallons in here right now. I'm actually going to just drop that whole jar in there to help soften the honey up so we can get it out of the jar. Maybe you should have gotten the canning grabber thingy, whatever the hell you want to call it, out to do this instead of this pair of tongs, but that's where we're at. So, just want to get this dissolved or liquefied a little bit more so we can get it on out. That's probably going to take a few minutes, so. Okay, there we go. So, as you can see, well, maybe you can see why, or what I'm meaning here, but honey's all dissolved. You can see this stuff up on top here. Like, this is just bits of wax, undissolved bits of pollen, you know, things like that, that just naturally occurs in honey. Like, it's not unsafe or anything like that. If I was just eating this as honey, I would not give even the slightest bit of a crap that it was in there, okay? There's nothing wrong with it, but it can mess up the brewing process. So that's what we're going to do. You can maybe even hear it a little bit, like it's starting to want to come up to a boil. So what we're going to do is we're going to let it do just that. We're going to bring this up to kind of more of a low simmer than a boil. And we're going to just slowly but surely skim all that junk off like you just saw me do a second ago. Now, as we're getting started on some of this, there's a couple of things I want to mention here. The cleaning and sanitation, like I talked about. Cleanliness, you want to make sure everything's clean, okay? Nothing's going to change depending on what piece of equipment you're using. Something like this, however, I did not sanitize this pot prior to using it. That's because I'm bringing water up to a boil anyway. It's going to kill off those microbes that we don't want in there anyhow. Same with this. Like, I'm dunking it into what will be boiling liquid at some point, so I don't care. Okay? It doesn't need to be sanitized. This is going to kill off anything that we don't want anyway. The other thing I want to make mention of real quickly, I don't actually have my notebook up here, so I've got a little pad instead. Anytime you are brewing, especially an experiment, but really kind of anytime, like, write down everything you're doing. Write down everything you're doing. What you added, how long you boiled, did you sparge your grains, did you not? Sparging is a beer thing, less of a wine thing. So don't worry about not knowing what that term is, because it's going to be mostly irrelevant with me. You know, what temperature did you pitch your yeast at? What temperature did you do this at? How much of this did you add? How much of that did you add? Etc., etc., etc. You know, how long was it in between times when you took samples for and measured gravity and so on. So I'm just going to kind of write down some of my initial things on this little notepad, and then I've got an actual notebook that I use for all of my breeding. Jesus, Michael. Brewing! Not for all of my breeding. I don't do any breeding of any form. So, you know, yeah. Anyway, as you can see now, it's starting to heat up some more, and so we're getting more of those impurities rising up to the top. I'm just gonna kind of gently skim them off the top. Pretty much just like you would if you were simmering bones to make stock. You know, you're gonna get some impurities from those bones. And you skim them out not because they're unsafe, but because they're gonna kind of make a slightly unpleasant finished product. And that's mostly what will happen with this. It contribute to off flavors. It might kind of retard the yeast growth, depending on what kind of impurities are in the honey. Yeah, things like that. Mostly going to be off flavors, though. And you can see I'm using a pretty shallow, bowled spoon, and that's kind of in part to make sure I'm not getting rid of too much of the liquid. The actual, dissolved honey in water. Now, what I used in this, if you were unfamiliar with the size of the jar, it's about a quart jar. It's a quart jar, which should have been probably about 3-ish pounds worth of honey. Now, if I was making just a mead or one of its offshoots, I had to use a hell of a lot more honey than that. My spiced mead, also known as a methlogen, that some people who might be watching this have tried, and some people haven't. And if you haven't and you're interested in acquiring a bottle for some purposes, hit me up privately and we can make arrangements for that. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. But at any rate, so when I made that, it was a 5 gallon, it's actually like 4.5 gallons, was what the initial brew was, and then I added a little bit more liquid at the end to kind of sweeten her up some, because it was a little dry even for me. So those of you who tried it, and you know how dry it was, imagine how dry it was before I added some more sugar to it. Let me tell you, it's pretty dry. Anywho, for that 5-gallon batch, it ended up being about 10 pounds of honey. This 5-gallon batch... Oh, and I should say that the alcohol percent ended up being... I think it was around 11. I'm not 100% sure because that was one of the incidents where I broke a hydrometer. Because as I've mentioned, I've broken several of them. Three or four, I don't remember specifically. Several. At any rate, though, so I broke the hydrometer before I could get a final gravity reading and figure out what the alcohol content actually was. So, I don't know. I don't know where it was exactly. Nonetheless, it was somewhere around like 10-11% alcohol by volume. So, it's not nothing. And that's kind of where wines start falling on the low end. Somewhere between 10 and 11%. They can get upwards pretty easily of about 15. Like without much effort. I mean, you can obviously get them much higher, but that requires some effort on your part. Like some real effort. Not that this doesn't require some anyway. Okay. You can see it's starting to kind of come up to a little bit of a boil. I'm going to turn the heat down some. I don't want it to get to a rolling boil, because then it's going to become difficult to skim. Kind of a nice low boil is where we're going to want it to be. Now, one of the things too, well, I suppose I'll cover that when we get to it. Never mind. Okay. Anyway, instead of boring you all with just this process for the next 30 minutes or so, we'll just say see you in about 25 minutes. Okay, so welcome back. Now, just real quickly to kind of show you, that is the junk that we've removed from our honey water. Like I said before, it's just bits of beeswax, undigested and transformed, I guess, for lack of a better word, pollen. Probably a little bit of like legs or something that broke off of bees and things like that, or if a bee dies in the hive and parts might fall off into the honey. It's perfectly safe to eat, but it does kind of mess our brewing process up. So we've got pretty close to everything that we're going to get out of it. And just let this go for a few more minutes. I'm going to go ahead and turn the heat back up, because what we're going to be doing next is I have raspberries. Lots of them. They're frozen right now because A, I wanted to make sure they didn't spoil before I got to them, and B, freezing any kind of fruits before you do something like this, it's actually kind of a good thing, because as the liquid inside the berries or the fruit of any form freezes, it starts bursting cell walls. So it actually makes it much easier to get all of the juice extracted from it. So what we're going to do, I actually turn that all the way up. Now I left them frozen though, because they were in these bags, and I didn't want them to thaw and the juice to start dripping out of them into the bags, and then it's kind of a pain in the ass to get all the juice out and blah, blah, blah. So we're just going to dump them in frozen. Pulled them out of the freezer maybe a minute ago. So we're going to let this come up to a nice, little bit more of a boil. Now, as you can maybe see behind me, I've got my bucket here on the sink. It's just upside down draining. After you've sanitized any of these things, you do not want to start drying them with a towel or anything like that, because there could be stuff on it. And then you're just going to reinfect your equipment, which sort of defeats the purpose of sanitizing it in the first place. So there we go. We can see it's come up to a nice boil now. I'm going to try and get some of this last little bit of junk out. Now, I had been simmering it for, let's see, it was probably about 25 minutes or so, maybe 30. We're just going to let it come up to a nice boil here for just a minute or two more. As you can see, it does kind of help get some of that last bit of junk out, impurities. I don't know why I used a word like junk there, but I did, so deal with it. But, okay. There, I think we go, at least for the moment. That should do. So now, what I'm going to do, dump all of these raspberries in there. Which, of course, is going to drop it down from a boil. That's fine. We're going to let it heat back up again here in a minute anyway. Every last one of them. Now, we're going to want to be careful as we're doing this, because we don't want it to boil over. Now, once I start seeing a little bit of action in the liquid again, we're going to turn the heat back down. Because, again, I don't want to boil over and lose my precious liquid here. So what we're going to do, but we also want these raspberries to break down real nicely. Forgot to grab a thermometer. Meat thermometer, but it'll work. Usually if you want a thermometer for brewing, you want it longer so you don't have to reach so far. But for this process, we're going to be fine with this. Anyway, I don't want to lose a bunch of this liquid as it starts to cook down, because then it's just going to be losing my fermentable sugars, which defeats the purpose. So, what we're going to do, we're going to let this do its thing here. Come up to a nice simmer. We're going to let it just simmer for probably 5-10 minutes to break down the berries real well, and we're going to keep an eye out for things like that guy. Yeah, there you go, you can see him. Not real well, but I'm going to kind of keep an eye out for things like that, because that's a bug. And picking fresh raspberries like this, you can get a couple bugs in it. And you know what? That's okay. So it's just extra protein. But I do kind of want to get them out of there. So we'll see if we can find, if there are any that I missed before I froze them. Because I kind of went through, that's not a bug, that's just a leaf. So is that one. That's a leaf. We don't really want that in there. So we can just kind of get those out. It's not necessarily going to hurt anything. But, it also doesn't hurt anything to get rid of them. So, that's what we're going to do, as much as we can, over the next little bit of time. Here. I don't know how well you can see the color yet. We can just do this. So, try not to drip on everything. I don't know how well you can see that. But that's the other part of how we're going to be able to tell we're getting the raspberries to break down and the juice to extract as the color of the liquid's going to become darker and darker and darker. Get a nice raspberry red going on. Okay, so we're going to let this do its thing here for a little bit. Because I'm an idiot, mostly, and I haven't figured out how to take time lapse yet. I'll just go ahead and cut this out here and pick this back up in a few minutes. Oh, one other thing I did forget to mention. 6 pounds of raspberries, roughly, is what I ended up using in this. And yeah, so there we go. See you guys probably in about 10-15 minutes. Okay, and here we are again. So you can see now, starting to get some actual activity in the liquid, so we've gotten up to probably pretty close to boiling at any rate. Maybe not quite there, but awful close. And then you can also kind of see how much the raspberries have broken down now. And I don't know how well you can see it from your angle, but the liquid is pretty red at this point now. There you go. A little bit better view, maybe. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Now I'm going to kind of actively stir this for a minute to help cool it down a little. Because I don't, like I said before, I don't want it boiling over. I don't want to lose what I got in there. Now, when you're brewing with whole fruit like this, there's kind of two ways to do things once you get it into the actual brewing vessel. You can strain it out, or you can leave the pulp in there for a little while. Now, the pulps and the seeds and all that other stuff is where you're going to get some different flavors. You know, in grapes especially, the skins and the seeds and all that junk that's still in there. Like, that's where you get your color, it's where you get your tannins, it's where you get all that stuff. I don't know how it's going to affect raspberry. So, I am opting for going all the way for it here. And we're going to go straight up, leave all this stuff in there, brew it with it on there for, I don't know, probably a week or two, until most of the primary fermentation is done. And then rack it off of the seeds and the pulp and the so forth and so on. Should also help it extract more sugars from the seeds, because once again, I don't know how well you can kind of see all that, but there's still some of the fruit pulp around the seeds there, even though it's broken down pretty nicely. For the most part. There's still the odd bigger chunk. So what we're going to do, we're going to call that good. And we're going to let that go just a few more minutes, actually. Again, we want to kind of make sure any other microbes that are in there that we maybe don't want are killed off. So that is going to require a little bit of heat, a little bit of time. There are chemicals you can add to it too. And it's definitely the more common modern way of doing things. I don't remember what it's called, but there's something that's basically usually comes in like tablet forms. You drop them in the liquid, and it kills off pretty much all. Like it's non-discriminate. It kills off yeast and bacteria and all that kind of stuff just like crazy. So you either drop it in at the beginning when you're using fruit like this to kill off wild yeast, and then you put in your own yeast, or you also use it at the end of the fermentation when you want the fermentation to end. Because here's the thing. A lot of the modern brewing yeasts are very resistant to alcohol. Now, the alcohol content will eventually kill off the yeast, but you may want to stop it a little bit short of where the yeast will die off because you want some of the sugars left. So that's where one of these things comes in. Again, I don't remember what it's called. It's easy enough to look up. I'll try to remember to look it up and put it in the description of the video here. But no promises that I do that. So, if not, you can look it up yourself. Brewing supplies websites all over the place sell them. But at any rate, so when you get to the point where you want it to end, you drop one of those in there. You let it sit for a couple days. It kills the yeast off. You rack it over to a new container, and away you go. It's also kind of a safety precaution if, after you let it sit for a while, the yeast is hopefully just died off naturally, before you go in and sweeten it up a little bit if it's not as sweet as you want it to be. Ow, that was very hot. That just landed on my arm. Okay. Shocking. I know, boiling liquid's hot. Anywho, so that's something you can do. I opt for not doing that. Not for any particular reason other than just giggles, mostly. I like to try and do my processes with as little additive as I can manage. So, that's what I do. It's not right, it's not wrong, it's just what I do. Plenty of people do it this way, plenty of other people, man, they will add whatever the hell they want to add for all sorts of craziness and different results. There we go, we can see it came back up to a nice boil since I stopped stirring it, and we're just gonna let that go for a minute now. Again, boiling liquid. I have not sanitized this pot that I'm going to use as a scoop. That's fine. So we're just going to scoop it in and pour it in to our primary fermenting bucket. And don't worry if it gets a little agitated. That's actually a good thing, because the yeast does need a little bit of oxygen in it to do its thing. So we're actually going to agitate it some intentionally to add some of that back in. Okay, so there we go. I don't know how well you can see the liquid that I'm pouring in, but let me tell you this right now. It is a bright red. Here, let's do this now that it's stopped boiling so you can kind of see. Like, it is a nice, beautiful red color. And pretty thrilled about that, and I hope during the brewing process it doesn't kill the color, because sometimes yeast can do that. So, there's that. Now, as I mentioned, we're doing a 5-gallon batch. And as you'll recall me mentioning a minute ago, this is only a 2-gallon pot. So that means we need more water. It's also still hot. So what I'm going to do, water right from the tap is fine to collect for this. Unless you've got, a well or something like that that's got some weird mineral contents and you want to kind of filter it or something like that first. In general, if the water is safe to drink, it's safe to just brew with as is, no extra insanity necessary. Okay, so what we're going to do, and this will also help cool down our liquid. So, one of the other things, as mentioning during the boiling process, high temperatures kill yeast, including our intentionally cultivated brewing yeast. So, this far too hot to put yeast in. And the technical term for adding yeast to it, since this is a wine, technically it's a must. The technical term for that is called pitching. That is another little bug that I somehow missed. Okay, so the benefit then, like I said, is we're going to help cool it down. Now, the reason I'm running the water into our brew pot here is also to help kind of get some of that last little bit of sugar off of or out of, rather, the inside of the pot. Now, I'm not really paying super close attention to how much I'm filling the pot up before I add it in, because as you can see, I've got graduated lines right on the side of my brew bucket. So I know that if I fill it up to here, this is a 5-gallon batch. I don't know how you guys can see it, but I can see through it pretty fine. We're at just a little bit below the 4-gallon mark. So we'll get some more water. It's still very hot. And that's okay. So what we'll do, after we have all of the water in that we need in, we'll put it someplace out of our way, since this is the kitchen that I eat at, cook out of and eat out of and all that kind of thing. Put this someplace out of the way, pop the lid on it, pop the airlock on it, and we'll just let it cool down for as long as it needs to cool down, which might very well be until tomorrow, at which point that's when we do the last of our processes. So we'll finish filling this up. It is very, very hot. We're probably gonna be finishing this up tomorrow. That's okay. We'll finish it up tomorrow. You know why? Because that's what we gotta do sometimes. That's just what we gotta do. Okay. Alright, I'm a little over the 5-gallon mark. I'm actually going to go even just a little bit more over the 5-gallon mark. That's okay. It's not a big deal. Because every time I rack this over, too, it's going to lose a little bit at the bottom, sediment and crap that you don't want to pick up anyway. So that's fine. It has cooled down quite a bit already, though, so that's good. Okay, so still too hot, like I said. So what we're going to do is we're going to lid this on up, which I'll do right now. There we go. That last side down. Now, see how the airlock works. See, you can see how it goes together. So then as the carbon dioxide will rise up through here, it'll push its way out through the bottom and up and out. But then, because of the water, air from outside can't get back in. This is a nice tight fit. Now, obviously it's not going to bubble or anything like that right now, because there's no yeast in here to do any fermenting. So this is just to keep wild yeast and bacteria and crap like that out as it cools, because as it cools, it's got a lot of sugar in it. So it would be a primo target for yeast and bacteria. We don't want that to happen. So we're going to let this cool either later today or tomorrow, maybe. We'll see. See how cool it gets. How long it takes to cool down. We'll come back and we'll finish up. So for now, see you later. Okay, welcome back. As you can see, it's the next day. Needed to wait for this to cool down so we could actually finish up what we need to finish. 5 gallons of liquid. Takes a little while to cool down. So, let's get done. Get everything else going. You can maybe see behind me as I'm opening this up. I've got some of my tools re-sanitizing because they've been sitting now for a day. And want to make sure we don't contaminate our wine must that we've worked, Jesus, so hard to produce. And this is not wanting to come off, which is always a pain with these buckets. But you know, it seals them then. There we go. Alright, so give you just a quick gander. So there it is. There's our wine must. You can see little bits of seed floating in it and all that kind of thing. So we're going to let this all sit like this and do its thing for a little while. Now, one of the other things I'm going to do here, get myself a little tasting glass. Now, part of the reason for the tasting glass is I'm going to put a little bit in of the raw must into the glass so I can kind of see how sweet it is, because one of the things you want to do, I mean, it's obviously going to be really, really sweet right now. Okay, so now we're going to just drop our hydrometer in there. See, there's no way that is right. There is no way that reading is right. I wonder if our pulp has screwed up some things. Or I wonder if this jar is just a little too... oh good, now the liquid isn't coming back out the tip. Okay, so this, not great. Let's see what happens dropping it straight in. Either there is a lot less sugar in this than I thought it was, or something screwed up with my hydrometer. I don't know which it is, but I don't like it. That might not be, this might not work as well as I thought, gang. We're going to find out, though. Okay, well, what's going to happen then? We're not going to add any acid to it, because that's one of the things that you can do, kind of adjust the, helps protect the finished product, and it also helps to control the sweetness. That's, I don't know why the hell I couldn't remember that. But, yeah, so what we're going to do, this is something I should have done before I started recording here, is you get just a little bit of warm water. We're we're going to get just a little bit of sugar. We're going to mix it up in that water. And then I'm going to add my dry yeast to that. And let it sit for a minute or two. Then we'll add that whole thing to the mix here. So what we're using in this is good old Red Star. You might recognize them from the grocery stores for bread yeast because they produce that as well. Premium Rouge, active dry yeast. Active dry active? Just active dry. So we're just mixing that around, letting the yeast start reactivating. I am going to write down the specific gravity readings that we took, but I don't think that it's right. I don't know though. We're going to find out. This might end up being a very, very weak wine because I may not have enough sugar in it. And you know what? So be it. So be it. That's the way it goes. Now, one of the other things I'm going to do here is got a yeast nutrient. Buy it from just about any brewing supply store. We're going to add a teaspoon to our must. All this is some minerals and so forth that the yeast needs for... actually, I don't even think I'm going to add a teaspoon. I think we're going to go about a half a teaspoon. So you don't need a ton. Screw it. We'll go with a whole teaspoon. I might be screwing myself up real bad with this. I don't know. I'm not a super advanced brewer. Okay, now we're going to get that stirred in. We're going to go ahead and mix this all up kind of vigorously, because we want to get a little bit of oxygen dissolved in there. Now, you can kind of see our yeast water. It's nice and cloudy, just kind of like it should be. Pour that on in there. Mix that up. Got an alarm going off in the background. That's not a big deal though. That's pretty much all there is to it. So, excuse me one second. I'm going to turn that off. Good times. Nice to be interrupted. That's fine. It's home brewing. That's how it goes. Sometimes weird shit happens. So then, we're just going to seal this up. Let it do its thing. Put it in a cool place out of the way. Specifically, it's going to be in the basement in my instance. And about a week or two after most of the primary fermentation is done, we will rack it over to a secondary fermenter and let it do its thing. So for now, that's all there is. Stay tuned though. You know, if you like this, subscribe. Keep up to date, because what I'm going to do then is, as I do the various rackings and clarifications and so forth, I'll do little updates for you and put them up as well. So, see you then.